The first thing before we even talk about HRT is reviewing your lifestyle, because hormones respond to what you do. And I call the triad is nutrition, exercise, and sleep recovery.
Hi there. Welcome to the Hotflash Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Ann Marie McQueen. And this week on the podcast, I have Dr. Nicky Keay. She's a British endocrinologist, author of the book Hormones, Health, and Human Potential, and editor of the new anthology, Myths of Menopause. Nicky holds a position of Honorary Clinical Lecturer in the Division of Medicine, University College London. She works with a range of athletes and is a ballet dancer and works with the Scottish Ballet. And she's very fond of using theatrical and mythical references in her work, which is so fun. And I think you'll really like her take on hormone therapy, on the transition of perimenopause. She talks about her own perimenopause. She talks about obviously the myths and the sirens of social media. And it was just a really great all-round discussion. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I'm Ann Marie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hotflash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Ann Marie.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Nicky Keay. Am I saying your name right?
That is correct, Nicky Keay. And apparently it's from Scotland. Apparently I'm a descendant of probably actually people that came from Norway. But anyway, we digress. Thank you so much for inviting me, and looking forward to having a good discussion.
Well, I have both your books here. I got a little too excited, and I haven't read all of either of them. That's sort of typical for me, but I've been absorbing them, and I'm really interested in, and people I respect said, you have to talk to Dr. Nicky Keay. She's great. And I'm always happy to speak to an endocrinologist, because I don't think we hear enough from you guys in this conversation. So I'll start out with the Myths of Menopause, which is an anthology. And I love the title. And in the book, you specifically call out social media sirens. So I'm just kind of wondering how this anthology came about, and why you say social media sirens.
Sure. So, I mean, through both of my books, I love Greek myths, ancient myths like that. So when I was proposed, why don't you edit? And you're right, I've got lots of amazing contributors there, edit a book entitled Myths of Menopause. Immediately, my mind went to what I describe as the female hormone odyssey. So every woman during her lifetime will experience, this hormone journey, right? And it is an odyssey. There will be challenges along the way. Let's accept that. But the point of the book is to bring together all the information you need in order to negotiate this odyssey. And that's why on the front cover, we have Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And by the way, so Odysseus was the one, who took a long time, this odyssey for 10 years to get back from Troy to his home in Ithaca. And it took a long way, and along the way, lots of challenges, etc. And by the way, the person that guided him on this journey was a female goddess, Athena. I'm just stressing that. And so that's why she is on the front cover, Athena, our goddess of wisdom, as it were, embodied in all my contributors, my co-authors, colleagues, etc. So we're all coming together as Athena, as it were, helping women, guide them through this female hormone odyssey, this particular bit, when hormones are changing, perimenopause, menopause. And so so when I'm talking about breaking it down into the sections of what are these myths here, then as you say, each section, by the way, I love ballet, dancing, that's my main passion. So they're not chapters, they're acts and scenes, by the way. But anyway.
And or in your other book, sorry to interrupt, is like there's a lot about the orchestra and the cast members. It's a really cool way to frame it all.
Yes, exactly. And something a little bit different, because, I want to give people a sort of get excited and interested in this. And, for example, in my first book, my mother-in-law read it, and she's not at all scientific, she's not a doctor or anything. But she came back and said, oh, I really love it, because she said, I get it. It's like all the hormones are members of the orchestra. And if one of them is out of tune, one instrument is out of tune, it can throw all the others off. So she got the concept. So I knew that this concept, people seem to latch on to that. So in the Myths of Menopause, I divide it into, sort of sections, obviously. And the big start of every section, which I did also in my first book, I have a little quote, a little thing just to sort of, as you say, frame it. And so one of the things is about, which really covers the whole book, frankly, the myths of menopause. What are these myths? And by the way, I described them as the sirens. So this was one of the challenges that Odysseus had to navigate on his Odyssey. The sirens, who are basically women singing sweetly and trying to divert sailors off course. Mm-hmm. So that is how I think of sometimes, well, quite a lot of the time, social media. There is some stuff on there. I mean, I do occasional posts, and there are others that I respect that put, really helpful information. But unfortunately, the vast majority is not, reliable and whatever. And, just experiencing myself as a woman, because I am on social media platforms and because I post stuff about menopause and whatever, then I get bombarded with, oh, the latest supplement and I don't know what for whatever it is for menopause, honestly. And it's like, oh my goodness, wow. So that was really the motivation for writing this book with a little help from friends to challenge these myths that are there and unveil the truth behind the myths, as I put it. But it will be with a little bit of a story flavour. So I talk about the sirens. What else? I've got Pandora's box. Like, these are all the symptoms or potential symptoms for, that you might experience going through menopause. So, little things like that, stories, I suppose, that people can relate to. I enjoy. That's the way I enjoy doing it.
No, I mean, it's awesome. It's you need a way to frame everything. I love it. Yeah. It's so different. Yeah. So, I just read the Odyssey, by the way. I mean, I'm 54.
Oh, wow.
I just read it. So,
well, not in Latin. I'll be very impressed.
Pardon?
In Latin?
No.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, that was when I was at school, and I did. Well, I'm showing my age now. We call them O-levels then, but now they're called GCSEs in the UK. And Latin was one of the things I studied. And I really loved Latin because it's like detective. You have to work out what it means, what's going on, what's the subject, what the blah, blah, blah. And this is exactly my approach to hormones. Yeah. You get a whole load of results potentially, and you've got the person, and you've got to piece it all together. What is going with what? So anyway, I actually had to read some of the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey,
wow,
original. We don't know where it came from, but anyway, only a small part, by the way.
Okay,
but just but anyway, it's a great story. But obviously, if you take it literally, it's like anything. It's like, hold on, that can't, we know it's not a little bit of, how can I say, poetic license, whatever, but the symbolism of it.
Yeah.
For example, the Odyssey of, here's a man trying to negotiate these challenges to get where he wants to go.
Yeah.
But I love it that it's a female goddess, Athena, of wisdom, that is the one guiding the man. Well, that also just gives it a little bit of a frisson, you know what I mean? So that's how I look on hormones as fantastic things, and putting them in a sort of story context, as it were, that I think helps people understand and relate to them, because hormones are really mysterious. You can't feel them, you can't touch them, and so it is difficult to appreciate and understand the power that they hold, and how changes in these hormones over your lifespan therefore are going to have big impacts on how you feel.
Yeah.
So that's really the message I want to get across.
So you do work with a lot of dancers, and I assume you work with dancers who are in perimenopause. What do you learn? Or no, are they all young and they're not going through?
Well, no, I mean, I work with women and men of all ages. So, I have the youngsters, aspiring athletes, dancers, yes. who are trying to, navigate that time when their hormones are changing and they're trying to, perform to their best. There's lots of pulls and pushes and things like this, social media, and lots of them end up not fueling sufficiently, so relative energy deficiency. I see a lot of in all age groups, but particularly I think the youngsters, and then of course, the sort of adult life, same thing for, 20s, 30s, men and women. I do have to be honest and say predominantly I do see women because they're more interesting. Well, certainly their hormones are,
Yeah.
So, and then absolutely I see a lot in the more mature age group, if we can put it that way. So 40s, 50s. Not necessarily dancers, but certainly there will be some in there in terms of dancers, because once dancers have maybe they've had a professional career and then they're going to retire. And now they often become teachers or move on to something else. So, they're still dancers, by the way. But yeah, they, of course, like any woman, will be going through menopause. And then same for masters athletes. That's a big section of people that I work with, because masters means, in that older age group, 40s, 50s onwards. And so inevitably, that includes a lot of women who are, trying to navigate menopause. So, yeah, I see all ages. Anything to do with hormones, that fascinates me. And my mission is to try and help people understand, appreciate, and realize that they can harness their hormones. And, I help them, guide them on their way to reach their personal full potential, whatever their age and whatever their goals, objectives are. I mean, it would be very different. It might be a young dancer wanting to be a prima ballerina, or it might be, an older woman just wanting to keep cycling and keep fit and healthy in her 50s, 60s. So it's the whole spectrum.
Okay, so when we go back to the myths of menopause, what are some of the things I assume that get your dander up? What are some of these
Right.
myths?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that it is a word. If we say the word menopause, what does that conjure up to most people? Quite a negative thing, probably a stereotype of a woman being a bit cranky, or she's getting a bit old and stuff like this. So the thing that really I wanted to stress at the very outset was that, menopause, for the majority of women, I accept there will be women, younger women from the average ages of menopause, by the way, is 51 when the ovaries retire. I accept there will be some women where this is much younger because of various medications, surgeries, etc. But for the majority of women, this is a natural physiological process. It's not an illness, it's not a disease. But because of this negative connotation, that's really sad. But I think this is bound up with where is this coming from? So there are two elements to this. Number one, our attitude to older people. And now that I am one of those older people, it's like, look, can't we be like Japan, where they actually respect and revere their elders who have gained all their wisdom? And so this is not exclusive to women, by the way. Men get older as well. Newsflash, right? Okay. So I think that is the thing that I see a lot, that it has a negative thing, and this is for two reasons. Number one, because it's normally associated with middle age, getting older, and women's ovaries retire, so you retire from everything, end of life, as you know, all this sort of thing, all this negative spin on it, right? So again, accepting there might be challenges, but it's like, every journey this is a journey, right? And this you can't just it's non-negotiable. It's there, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not a roadblock. It's just a little bit of a change or of direction. You see what I mean? So that's really the thing about, and getting old in general. I think that's something. But the unusual thing, women compared to men, is that for women, our ovaries retire sooner than our other organs in our body. So that's why there is a distinction between men and women, although we both age, of course. And so that's the first point. The second thing about as a concept, the main myths of menopause are, number one, it's this dreadful thing, illness, disease, awful, end of life, blah, 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 blah. But also, where does this come from is my other concern. And I think we need to, listen, I think things are looking really positive. We're talking about it more. That's great. But actually, we need to think about the younger generation. So from a very young age, as a teenager, the teenagers are being fed or given this impression that having menstrual cycles, hormones, it's this negative thing, oh gosh, this is burden you have to bear, la la la. But as I say, Horme, she was the goddess of effort, energy, and action. Okay. And so when a woman is accused, oh, you're very hormonal, I suggest all women take that in a positive way. You're being compared to a goddess of effort, energy, and action, because that is indeed what the hormones do for you. So I think there are two aspects to it. We have to, ask ourselves, our view about getting older and that, but also thinking to the youngers, what are the information that we're giving them, or the spin on this, and if it's already negative as a teenager, then it's going to carry on throughout their life. So I think making sure that we're honest and say there are challenges, right? This is an odyssey. It's a female hormone odyssey, but there are lots of positives in this, right? You need these hormones. Hormones direct the expression of your DNA. Wow, that's amazing. So they're pretty significant things. So don't bemoan them, embrace them. And try and harness them, try and leverage them, as it were, to your advantage, you see. So I think those are the two main things that get me, as you say, a little bit annoyed when we talk about menopause, this negative associated with getting old is a bad thing. And also, remembering that it's not surprising, because as a young person, you're given lots of negatives talk. And also the other thing about the menstrual cycle, it's sort of hammered home that the only purpose is for reproduction, but that if you go along with that, that's just absolutely ignoring the amazing effect of hormones, like I've said, on directing gene expression, and therefore they are key in determining all aspects of our health, mental and physical. And so just to say, oh well, the menstrual cycle, so what, it's only about reproduction, blah blah blah, that's totally missing the point entirely.
Why do you think we're having a hard time in perimenopause? Do you think we're having a harder time in perimenopause? You see so many different women.
What you mean in general over the
it seems, I don't know. It's hard to tell whether we're having a harder time in perimenopause. I talk to so many people.
We're talking about it more, or maybe
we're talking about it more, or we're more disconnected, or the environment. You just, as someone who's a non-medical person, but just researching it and talking to people, it seems like I'll go down a road and then I think, okay, it's that, and then it's not. And anyway, I'm rambling, but what I'm talking about?
No, I think there are all the elements you mentioned, kind of thing. I think generally, as a whole, women are quite resilient. We just get on and push through. We don't complain. I remember coming back very early from maternity leave. My baby was in a papoose, and I probably totally bad for health and safety, but I was in a centrifuge, doing experiments. So as women, we just push through. So we just get on with it. We don't complain. We don't say anything. So I think it's not that it's become worse necessarily. It's just that women didn't realize, knew it had a negative connotation, so it's like, don't mention it, right? So maybe it's that it's always been there. Of course, we know, since the perimenopause has happened to every single woman, but maybe we were hesitant, reluctant to mention it because of this negative spin. And the moment you mention that you're having a hard time, then women would be concerned that this might have implications for their work, etc., like this, you see. So they just keep quiet. And, whereas, so that's one thing. Maybe we know it's always been there, but maybe women just kept quiet about it because they're worried about the stigma attached to it, potentially. But it's true that I think maybe also there is, that social element to it. And it's now coming to fruition, what I've said, that all these women who were taught as teenagers in school that it's negative, it's dreadful, and all this sort of thing, and they don't understand their hormones, and they're put on the contraceptive pill, which masks, and then suddenly they come to this point in their life, and they, it really throws them because they haven't really been in tune, like you say, with their own hormones or understanding, either from a, understanding point of view, positive look on hormones, and also literally they might not have experienced times of flux in their hormones, because it's very interesting that the teenage years are like the mirror image of perimenopause. So the teenage years, the estrogen, relatively speaking, is higher than the progesterone. Teenagers, heavy periods, painful periods, etc. like this. Mood changes, we know. Hold on, perimenopause. What do women complain of often? Heavy periods, mood changes, painful periods, more PMS, all this sort of thing. So, but if you haven't kind of like experienced that as a teenager and now you come to perimenopause, you think, oh my God, what the heck is this? So I think there's many elements to this. And, again, being honest and open and saying, look, perimenopause is probably, it is a challenging time, similar to the teenage years for, one's going up and one's coming down, as it were, in terms of ovarian activity. And also it's difficult. People like certainty. We all want certainty. We all want, right, you're menopause, you're like this. But perimenopause, by definition, is uncertain. So this is a really problem to get your brain to accept. In perimenopause, the definition is uncertainty. Some cycles you'll feel, okay, that was fine. That was maybe it was all in my head. And then the next cycle will be the cycle from hell. Really heavy periods, PMS, like full house. And so it plays on your mind. It's like, hold on, was I imagining that? It's just like, it's really confusing. Plus, your mood is labile because the hormones are shifting around so much. So it can be a really challenging time. And so women, as I said, we all want certainty, but honestly, that is the main hallmark of perimenopause. And but acknowledging that and communicating to women who come to me and say, look, I don't know, am I losing my mind? And why can't I exercise the way I used to? And they're just really frustrated. They don't get it. And nothing's changed, but it's like, yeah, but something has changed. Your hormones have changed. And so when I say that, and also I say, look, it is this uncertain time. So understanding that and accepting it and knowing, okay, this is part of this journey. The water's going to be a little bit rough, but ultimately the ovaries will fully retire. And menopause in some ways is kind of a calmer time because then you don't have all this uncertainty. So positive, hey.
It is a positive. One of the things that has been happening as more and more people are talking about it is that it's just presented in a very simplistic way. And what I get from your writing is it's much more complicated. The orchestra, it's not just about estrogen. It's also about progesterone and testosterone and all the other things. So how do you approach it from that way as a practitioner? Because what I see when I go on social media is you need hormone therapy, you need estrogen. And there seems to me to be a really big gap between the doctors saying that and then the practitioners who are like integrative, functional, naturopathic, even endocrinologists who are saying there's no magic bullets. You might want to think about progesterone. That seems like a glaring gap to me. I wonder how you feel about it.
Yes, well, definitely. I've got two protagonists, if I can put it that way, of progesterone, right? So there's Lara Bryden from New Zealand. Lovely. I've actually met her in person because I took a trip to New Zealand where my son's doing a PhD. Anyway,
nice.
Lovely. And also Geraldine Pryor, who is absolute heroine in progesterone terms of, well, hormones in general. And they both have written in the book and, give good evidence that, yes, the thing is we all talk about, everyone's heard of estrogen, estradiol, it's like that is seen as the top hormone sort of thing. And progesterone is kind of pushed under the carpet. It's like, what's that? That's not really useful, is it? I suppose you could say, if you were to believe the progesterone stands for progestation. So if you fall into the camp that think the menstrual cycle is only about reproduction and progesterone is only for gestation, you would, logically would think, well, what, so what? But the key thing is that in perimenopause, the first hormone to actually falter is progesterone. That's the one that starts falling. And that is thought to be, quite a crucial step towards developing some of these, this Pandora's box, opening Pandora's box, all the menopausal symptoms you see. And actually, if anything, the estrogen is high during perimenopause, just as is in the teenager, like we discussed. So I think several points to this. Number one, yes, progesterone is the unsung heroine in this piece. And in terms of, HRT, what's going on there? I mean, in the book, I describe it as going back to this, analogy with the Odyssey. This is a time of Scylla and Charybdis. So Odysseus had to navigate between two really dreadful perils. On the one hand, we have this deadly whirlpool, which will suck you down. And then the other place, we have this six-headed monster that's going to eat you. So he's got to navigate between this somehow or other, right? And this is exactly how a woman in perimenopause, menopause, she's already feeling not great, a bit of out of equilibrium. And now she's got these two opposing camps. There's one camp that says, you absolutely will be stupid not to take HRT and take testosterone Wariacha. And by the way, take the maximum dose, right? You definitely make you live longer, all this sort of stuff. So there's that camp that are very vociferous about HRT. And then there's the other camp, which is the entire opposite. That says, oh, no, you shouldn't touch it with your barge pole. It's not an illness, not disease, not replacement. It will give you breast cancer, all this thing. So it's really difficult to know. But guess what? It's the middle course. The first thing before we even talk about HRT is, reviewing your lifestyle, because hormones respond to what you do. And I call the three things, the triad, is nutrition, exercise, and sleep recovery. To quote Hippocrates, I told you I like my Greeks, right? 2,000 years ago, he said, if we could give every individual just the right amount of nourishment, just the right amount of exercise, not too little, not too much, we would have found the surest way to health. If only we would remember what he said 2,000 years ago, right? It truly is that simple as a starting point. At the time, he didn't realize that, of course, the intermediary thing between our actions and our health, by the way, that's the hormones, because the hormones respond to these things. But what happens if your hormones have changed? Here's your menstrual cycle during your adult life, and now you're coming to perimenopause, ovaries going part-time, menopause. So if the hormones have changed, then of course you have to change your inputs. So, just getting off my chest, things that really annoy me. The phrase hormone imbalance, right? That's being really disrespectful to evolution and hormones. They have had millions of years of evolution. They know quite well how to balance themselves, and they have a biological clock. The problem is, I'm afraid, we have to be reflective of us. What could be unbalanced is our behaviors, like Hippocrates said. So the first step for any woman when she's going through perimenopause, whatever her age, is review and revise your lifestyle. There is no such thing, newsflash, as the menopause diet. There's no such thing. It is just the fundamental diet, nutrition, food groups, but maybe the proportions should change. More protein than carbs, for example, right? And equally for exercise. Exercise, we all know, is helpful. But, again, looking at the proportions, we should be doing more strength training, because not only are our menstrual cycle hormones changing, the estrogen and progesterone, but also men and women, growth hormone will decline. Growth hormone is a really powerful, what we call anabolic hormone, builds muscles, bones, etc. Okay, and so again, knowing that there are these hormone changes, we have to reflect that in what we do. So the first step for any woman before she even thinks HRT, look at your lifestyle, review, revise. Okay, and anyway, look at that as a positive thing. This is an opportunity to refresh, review, etc. And then you come to the decision about HRT. So you've done all the lifestyle you can, but maybe you're really still struggling with hot flushes, topical, or whatever it is, or your quality of life is not what you want. I mean, being realistic, HRT is not the elixir of youth. It won't convert you back to a 21-year-old. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, right? But if you have done all your lifestyle stuff, and you think, okay, I've done that pretty well, but you're still struggling, then that's when HRT can be very helpful, okay? It is the main reason, clinical indication for HRT is quality of life in this age group, right? That's it. And by the way, incidentally, it does also decrease all-cause mortality, especially if you take it soon, within 10 years of arriving at menopause. Okay, so the main cause of death in menopausal women, newsflash, it's not breast cancer, it's cardiovascular disease. So if you're doing all your lifestyle stuff and you're taking HRT, then actually that, as I said, reduces all-cause mortality. So yeah, it's not going to make you 21, but it will help you enjoy a healthy life, from menopause afterwards, by the way, which is a third of your life.
If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know I'm a root cause girl at heart. And when we dive into what makes us function, you get right down to our mitochondria. They are like the battery pack for our cells. That means they're our power source. And don't you want to do a little house cleaning on your power source? MitoPure by Timeline contains a rare postbiotic urothalin A, and it works by promoting a process of cellular cleanup that clears out dysfunctional mitochondria. MitoPure's own testing has shown improvements in energy levels, recovery time, endurance, and more. Timeline is offering 10% off your order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com/hotflash. That's timeline.com/hotflash. Can I ask you a question about that? Because I feel like not everyone is on the same page about that. Like, for example, the Women's Cardiology Committee in the US, who I had in the podcast, they did a review of the research and said they did not recommend hormone therapy to improve cardiovascular.
Well, but it's a case of priority, clinical indication. I agree with them. You do not take HRT because it's going to prevent a heart attack. That is not valid. You take HRT because of quality of life, because you're struggling with hot flushes, mood, whatever it is, right? And you've done the best you can with your lifestyle. You really have, but you're really still struggling. So that is the main indication for taking HRT. It's not, absolutely, I agree, it's not preventative medicine and should not be given for that rationale. But I'm just throwing it in there. By the way, an extra benefit is, it does, we know, help in terms of cardiovascular health and also bone health. Because although it's cardiovascular health, as I said, is the main cause of death, but, osteoporosis is the silent killer, literally, right? So taking, in the UK, certainly, HRT is the first choice option for both the prevention, and in this case, it is truly prevention, and treatment of poor bone health, both pre-menopause and post-menopause, by the way, okay? The young woman with REDS or younger woman. So thank you for making, that's a really important point to stress. The clinical indication is for quality of life. In brackets, there is evidence that it can help with cardiovascular health, and out of brackets, it definitely is good for bone health. So, but again, I'm not, I'm not in the camp of forcing every woman to, oh, you should take HRT, it's stupid if you don't, right? That's attitude. But it's knowing the pros and the cons. Knowing these are the pros. The cons are that it's true, it does increase the risk of breast cancer by an extra 4 cases per 1,000 women on 50 to 59 age group. But also to put that in context, that's the same as taking the contraceptive pill. And if you're doing 2.5 hours or more of exercise per week, it decreases the number of cases by 7. So if you remember Hippocrates and you weigh it up and think, actually, I'm really struggling, I do want HRT, and you're doing exercise, actually, there's more positive than negative, if I can put it that way. So, it's that making that informed decision for you as an individual woman, what's best for you. You've read, all the facts and figures, and what do you feel comfortable with doing,
Do you have any thoughts about alcohol and hormone therapy, or any concerns about it? There's a lot of news on alcohol and health coming out in the last couple of weeks out of the US, but I just wondered, I don't know of a lot of people who talk about it. Is there any reason to be careful if you are drinking a certain amount of alcohol and you're on hormone therapy?
Well, I think you should be anyway, how much alcohol you're drinking, right? Because, the risk factors for breast cancer, the main one, a whopping extra 24 cases per 1,000 women, is due to being overweight and basically an unhealthy lifestyle, right? And drinking, 2 units per day of alcohol increases your risk of breast cancer. So I'm not even bringing HRT into the conversation here, but in general terms, it's not a good idea, right? And also the main reason for alcohol is, just limiting alcohol or being mindful of it, is that it really disturbs your sleep, right? Because, and we know this, you think, oh, alcohol make me feel nice and relaxed, have a good night's sleep, but actually we know it doesn't. Disrupts your sleep. One of the main symptoms of perimenopause, menopause is disrupted sleep, right? So if you add insult to injury, it doesn't make sense. And I have so many women who report that, their tolerance for alcohol really plummets when they reach the period. It makes their sleep worse, and it does increase your risk of breast cancer. So, I think that you should be looking with time to refresh, review. I'm not saying you should not drink any alcohol, but, do you really need that glass of wine every evening with your meal? Probably not. You know, am I saying never have anything, even never have a glass of champagne at a celebration? I'm not saying that either. But I'm just saying be mindful. What benefits are you getting from that alcohol, other than you think it's making you feel better when in fact it's not? Probably, and again, bone health, blood pressure. So I think in general terms, whether you're taking HRT or not, this is an opportunity to revise your intake of alcohol, put it that way.
So you talk about, okay, so the hormones can impact your mental health and mood.
Yep.
But you also talk in your book about how your thoughts can impact your hormones.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
really
so, yeah,
fascinating.
can you talk about that a little bit? Because I have a theory that if you have a sort of pattern of negative thinking, which I did, which I would have told you I was a very positive person, but running in a tape was negative thoughts. And they really ramped up a lot during perimenopause. But I think there's a feedback loop. And can you just
No,
talk?
you're absolutely right. Listen, you make such an important point, that, how we process information does have an effect, and it's quite staggering. As a sort of kind of like an old-fashioned doctor, I like the proof and things. It's like, oh my goodness, when I read studies about, for example, in those women and indeed men who are really anxious about their body weight, their body shape, cognitive restraint, think they should eat less, even if they don't. But, just that thought process, negative thought process, it affects the level of T3, one of the thyroid hormones. It's like, that is incredible. And again, we know women who get FHA, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, women who have had regular periods and then they're in a situation of stress, or they process the situation as being really stressful and awful. COVID, need I say more? Women's periods gets disrupted. So how you process the information, how you think, I suppose you could say, that does have an absolutely effect on your hormones. And you're right, it can be a vicious circle. The more you get anxious, the hormones don't go the way you want them to, then you get anxious because of that, and it just is a vicious circle, absolutely. And the other evidence we know that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I got one of the experts, the leaders, I was very delighted, to write a section about that they call it the biopsychosocial model, right? So breaking that down, because I was like, what's anyway? So bio means the hormones, like we talked about, directing the expression of DNA. So, psycho, how do you process what's happening to you? And social, your environment. What are other people? If everyone else is saying, oh, this is a dreadful thing, then this is all going to influence you. But so therefore, going back to the CBT, there's good evidence that she's run Professor Maya Hunter, she's run trials, etc., to show that, processing this information. What are you going to do when you feel a hot flush coming on, right? How do you think about that? If you think, oh my God, no, negative, it's definitely going to be a bad one, right? But if you think, okay, whatever the rights, again, behavioral, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? But this points out that we have a choice. When you're sitting in a traffic jam, you have a choice. You can either think, well, it is what it is. I'll just put on some music, I'll chill. There's nothing I can do about it except, or you can get really stressed. You can think, oh, why is this now? I'm running late, the stupid person. You have a choice how you react. So I think that's really empowering. Next time you're on the verge of like, just actually, is this really important? And what do I have control over? If you have, how are you going to cope with all of this? It's like, oh gosh, I've got piles of work. It's like, rather than going to panic mode, it's like, okay, let's be calm about this. Let's prioritize, let's make a list. So trying to, manage how you process the information, that can really affect, in turn, affect your hormones or more importantly, how you respond to those changes in hormones. So that's a really important point. And the more and more even now at my old age, I still always learn things, and hormones become even more and more fascinating.
Well, I mean, it's just from a common sense perspective, which is where I sit.
Yeah.
If it was all about hormones, it would be exactly the same for everyone.
Exactly. So there are two elements to that. So there's definitely this, going back to this biopsychosocial, right? So your personal sensitivity to these hormones, right? We know that women who have PMS, premenstrual symptom syndrome, and also maybe postnatal depression. It's a triad. Probably, sorry, are more likely to suffer symptoms during perimenopause, menopause, because they've got a sensitivity to changes in hormones, okay? So that's one thing, your personal biological response to hormones, as you say. Even if it's the same level for a different woman, she might feel totally differently. That's one thing. Also, how do you respond? Like you say, what's your reaction to the situation, to the hormones changing? You do, to some extent, have a choice about that. And then it's that cultural background. I'm one of the contributors to the book. You know, she comes Indian, Bangladeshi, Asian background. And she says, you know, we're talking about the negative stigma from a young age. She said it was, you know, as a young girl, if you had a period, you had to sit like in a certain corner, right? We don't, but it was the irony of it. She said it was taboo. We don't mention the P word, right? Don't mention period. Yet everyone knew because you were annexed some way. Exactly. So it's like that, what? And so that will influence how you think about your hormones and how, you know, so it's, as you say, it's not just like a mechanical thing. Here's the dose of hormone, it responds this way. As you say, otherwise everybody would be the same, which would be very boring, would it not? And this explains also why, you know, especially if we think about perimenopause, menopause, of course every woman's going to experience it differently because she's not a clone. She's got her own personal sensitivity to the hormone. She's got her thoughts, her expectations, you know, how she processes information, and she's got what cultural background does she come from? What's, you know, what is it like there? So yeah, it's very, very different. And on that aspect, it's very interesting in Japan, which I mentioned already, where in Japanese, they don't even have a word for hot flushes, right? They talk about menopause as the second spring because they see it in a positive light, partly because they revere and respect, you know, older people, and also because they, you know, kind of accept that things change, but that doesn't mean that it's like, as I say, all negative. That's why they call it a second spring. So it's fascinating. There's a big interaction of hormones in the environment and background, etc.
So how does those variations between us inform how you prescribe hormone therapy and how women respond to it?
Well, this is the question about blood tests, because most people, you would think, and generally I have to say, yes, I like my hormone blood test very much. I like to have some quantification of the numbers. But this is an unusual situation where we're not going to be titrating it according to a number, are we? Because we've just said two women could have exactly the same level of hormone, but it will have different effects, especially the ovarian hormones. So that goes back to the fundamental principle that HRT is prescribed. The only clinical indication is quality of life. So how are you experiencing, you know, how are you experiencing the change in your hormone levels, right? And we're going to titrate the dose according to how you feel, not according to your blood test necessarily, okay? So certainly in the UK, we say for women over 45, because the average age of menopause is 45 to 55, if you're 45 plus, we can it's pretty certain that, you know, it's perimenopause if you're describing hot flushes, all the symptoms, you know, and things like this. And so again, remembering that we said earlier, perimenopause is a time of uncertainty. If we did a blood test, we could get a false negative or positive. We could catch you on a very good cycle where the hormones are actually playing ball and they're fine. Or we could have you on a cycle where they're not, they look a little bit weird and messed up. And so we could draw the wrong conclusion from that. So that's why we base it on symptoms. And so when we talk about HRT, the basic principle of any medication is you're aiming for the lowest effective dose. So you start really low dose of estrogen, you know, the minimum dose of progesterone, and then you see, okay, let's have a chat in 3 months' time, see how you're feeling. You know, but I warn them, it might be we have to change the dose, so don't be disappointed. This is the other thing, explaining exactly what HRT does. It's not the elixir of youth, and it does take a bit of patience to find the right dose for you. But there's no point wading in there with a really whacking high dose, because then you might get side effects, symptoms because of the high dose, you see? And then it becomes really difficult to distinguish between, is it too much, the HRT too high dose, or is it menopause? We don't know. So a woman presenting, she's done her homework with her box, she's lifestyle, but she's still struggling. It's like, yeah, I understand about HRT. We've gone through all the pros and cons and everything. And she's like, right, I want to try HRT. So the next thing I say is, right, that's great. And you've got a uterus, so we need to give you both estrogen and progesterone, and we're going to start you at the lowest possible dose, okay, and see. But, I say don't be disappointed. We might need a little bit more. Or again, there are so many options out there how to take HRT. Gel through the skin, patch for the estrogen, progesterone, micronized, body identical, whatever you want to call it. Progesterone is probably the top choice, I would say. But a woman with really, really heavy bleeding, then actually something like the Mirena coil would be a good call. So, it's in my book, I have a little flow diagram. It's a sort of mix and match, as I say, right? You have to tailor it for the individual woman, but with the underlying principle that we always start off the lowest possible, and then we see how it goes, okay?
Okay, and when you say that, I think that makes a lot of sense. The low and slow, people always talk about that with, other forms of
exactly anything, isn't it?
Yeah. But there are doctors and practitioners who are now prescribing supraphysiological level of hormones. And I saw a doctor on social media who I'm trying to get on the podcast because I desperately want to find out what she's talking about, who said that those low levels that you are giving, that most people are giving, are inflammatory. And what she does is prescribe high levels and you actually have a period. That's not just her. There's like a number of people doing that as a practice, as an approach.
Well, I would be interested to see the evidence for that. That a low dose, show me the inflammatory markers, show me the pathway. I mean, that makes no sense to me because we know that actually for bone protection, the bones don't need a lot of estrogen, by the way, quite low dose. So I have no, let's see the evidence for this. Let's see the studies that show this, because in my experience, actually you don't need a lot, right? And so there's no reason why you would give the supraphysiological, because there are side effects. And also the other thing is, once you start high, then you have to go even higher. Where'd you go? We have a situation called tachyphylaxis where the receptors get a bit fed up. It's like, oh, more of this estrogen. It's like, oh, honestly, just go away. And so then you have to take even more to have an effect. So then you get into this vicious cycle. So, and by the way, the other point you mentioned there. So number one, I'll be interested to see what this evidence is, because it has to be evidence-based medicine. We have to prescribe on evidence, on recommendations by. In the UK, we have the British Menopause Society, and I've done their course and everything. And they're very, very clear, right? And it's all based on research and facts and reviews and all this sort of thing, right? So the other point is, you mentioned, oh, you have to get to bleed. Well, that's not necessarily the dose. It's actually how you're taking the HRT. So for every woman that's got a uterus, you will need to have estrogen and progesterone. If you take estrogen by itself, that is definitely dangerous, because the uterus lining will get too thick, potentially even malignant. So we don't want to go there. So you will have to take estrogen and progesterone together for the majority of women. No ifs and buts and whatever. But you do have and you take estrogen typically every day. For example, you daily put on some gel on your inner thigh or whatever it is, for example. What about the progesterone? You do have a choice. You can either take it in blocks to kind of mimic the cycle, I suppose you would say. And so you will probably get a withdrawal bleed. It's not a period, it's a withdrawal bleed, right? But on the other hand, and that is a particularly good way of taking it, definitely in the younger age group who are taking it for bone protection, we give it in blocks, okay? And we tell them you will expect a withdrawal bleed, and that's an indication we've got you on a dose of estrogen that is having some biological effect, by the way. So it's kind of like a good sign. And also, if it's the perimenopausal woman that's still having some sort of periods, then we would say let's do it in a cyclical fashion. But there's another way of doing it. You can give it both of them continuously. So estrogen every day and some progesterone every day. For example, the micronized progesterone we've been talking about. If you're going to take it continuously, you take 100 milligrams in the evening, because it has a really pleasant soporific effect, which Sherilyn Pryor, and improves hot flushes overnight. She's done a lovely study in Canada. Anyway, so in that case, you wouldn't expect to get any withdrawal bleeding. It's nothing to do with the dose. It's to do with how you're taking the progesterone element, right? So it's not to do with the dose. But having said that, if you're on the continuous one, you wouldn't expect to get any bleeding. So if you did get unscheduled bleeding, sure, we'd have to look into it and see the thickness of the endometrial lining and, maybe alter the dose. Maybe the dose of estrogen is too high, or you need to increase the dose of progesterone. So it still goes back to the fundamental principles that I've been taught and all the organizations are saying. start with the lowest possible dose and then titrate according to symptoms. And again, in the mix and match option, depending on the woman's choice and her circumstance, etc., then you can take it HRT so you do get a withdrawal bleed or that you don't.
Well, thank you for answering my question about a person I saw on social media, because that's kind of that's kind of a left field thing, but I am obsessed with this topic.
Well, no, absolutely, we should be. We want to get to the nitty gritty, and I'd be interested to hear if there is what the evidence is. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
but in the UK, we have had this problem. We had a quite how can I put it? So there's a documentary series called Panorama in the UK, and they were, I think, fairly, but they were pulling, bringing to task or whatever, a doctor here who has been giving out high doses. And some concerns are raised there. If you step out of the box of doing what's recommended according to recommendation and according to licensed dosage, etc., you kind of, there are risks. You're playing with fire, really. And I don't want to be a guinea pig, thanks. So, I'm going to go with what is recognized as being safe practice,
Did you know I also have a Substack? That's just a fancy way of saying I have a newsletter. But listen, it's not like every other newsletter. I am the only journalist in the world who's made menopause my beat. And each week I share research, news, products, tips, and tricks from the world of menopause and midlife. Sometimes I even write an essay. Hotflash Inc. on Substack is where I pull together everything that's here and in the menosphere, and I break it down just for you, so that we can try and make sense of it all and figure out what to do together in real time. Join more than 5,000 women practitioners, CEOs, and more, and become a subscriber today. You can get my podcast as well as special video and audio drops you can't get anywhere else. Sign up today at hotflashinc.substack. It does seem that there's so much hormone therapy enthusiasm that you get your knuckles rapped if you question it in any way. That is one thing that I've noticed. The reaction to that documentary was profound, because I saw that documentary. It was very well researched, I thought.
Yes, exactly.
I thought there were, as a journalist, there was more than enough reason to do it.
Yes.
And if you're a journalist and you're getting reports of things,
yes,
I've had this happen where I'm like, I don't want to do that story because that's involving that person, and that person, people feel a certain way about this business.
No, well, exactly. But the thing is, it shouldn't, and I also know the doctor in question, and lovely doctor, and the individuals start off as well-meaning, and of course, doctors, you don't want to do harm, and there are some elements, of fact that actually some women don't absorb it very well through the skin. We know that is true. So absolutely, but nevertheless, we would get nowhere in this world if we're scared of putting our head above the pulpit and saying, excuse me, otherwise then things would get out of hand. So, it has to be scrutinized in the air, in the open, and not attacking, absolutely not an individual, out to this individual. That's really important to say. But, it's always like when you're learning new things and, you take on board what's being said, that's, willing to learn and adapt, and also accepting that women are individual. So there will be some cases probably where a woman might need actually quite a high dose. So, but that is the job of the personalized approach that is so important, I think, in this area.
Well, I don't know if you hear about these things, but I've had friends. It seems like this is such a topic, and so many people are going on hormone therapy, that there's doctors who actually aren't very sure what they're doing. Like, I've had some friends who are telling me that what they've been put on, and I'm like, I don't think that doctor knows what they're doing with you. And that's it's a little bit scary. So when there's very famous people doing something, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. I don't know I don't even know what I'm saying, but I just
no, I do. Well, and I addressed that in my book because I wrote the chapter on HRT, Scylla and Charybdis, right? And that's one of the myths. It's like, doctors don't know what they're doing. I mean, probably there are that aren't so certain as others. Like in any profession, there are some that are more specialist than others. So I suggest, my approach is I recommend to women that, they do their homework. get themselves as informed as possible, number one. So when you walk in there, you're pretty good, and there are good, reliable sources. My book. No, but also, seriously, there are also like the British Menopause Society, all these sorts of, wherever you are in the world, there will be a menopause society and there will be a patient arm. So, you can inform yourself, it's the first thing. And the second thing is try and choose who you're going to see. So here in the UK, I say, we have GP surgeries where there's a collection of doctors. And then you need to, see, are you seeing a doctor, or ask the practice manager, which of the doctors is a member of the British Menopause Society and has done their training course. I've done their training course. Wow, it's intensive. And it says if you do this course, then, which is lots of practical examples of prescribing, etc. Then, you will have all the knowledge and information to treat 95% of women, because of course there will be 5% where it is tricky. They have had breast cancer and, like complications. And then that is a tertiary referral to, we say, we'll need the specialist in the hospital setting. So as a woman, you want to discuss HRT and want to have something prescribed, do your own homework is my top tip. Do all the research so you are informed, the different types of HRT, all the things like that, right? And hopefully my book is a friendly resource. It's not going to be too dry and dull and boring with the little myths thrown in, so you can have a look there. So get the information so you understand the terminology, and then do your research, who you're going to go and see. And make sure you're going to be seeing a doctor who has experience, qualification, whatever, in this area. I agree, if you just go and see somebody who, frankly, it's not their area of interest, because, by the way, if you are interested in this area, as I am, then I can tell you will go out and seek out the best CPD, continuing professional development, there is, okay? And all doctors in the UK, we have to have evidence that we've done CPD, but it's your choice what you do. But if you're following your instinct and interest, of course, like I did this course, it's like, great. Not only do I want to do this course, I want to learn, but also it counts for my CPT points. And, that's great. So make sure you're seeing somebody who is up to speed and up to date. That's kind of, and then with those two elements, you're up to speed and up to date. You're seeing someone who is also up to speed and up to date. Then you can have this, this collaborative approach to HRT and an open discussion,
I love that. That's what Athena would do if she.
Absolutely, of course she would. The goddess of wisdom. So be your own Athena. I love it. Brilliant that you brought it back to that. Be your own Athena. What would Athena do? How was she going to guide Odysseus on all these perils? Right? She's going to look at all the evidence, all the options, and make okay, this is the way to do it.
Women who have surgical menopause, I feel this is lumped in with regular menopause a lot of the time.
Yes.
So that is one thing that I feel is maybe complicating things. But another is that often those women aren't given hormone therapy, which seems to be happening less and less, thank goodness.
Thank goodness, yes.
But that they're still given estrogen only. And I wondered what you thought about estrogen only. You don't have your uterus. You don't technically need progesterone. Do you think that it should be prescribed or not? Because I feel, and again, just the common sense, you walk in there with all your hormones and I don't know, it just feels strange that you only walk out with estrogen.
You make a very good, so those 2 points. First thing, surgical menopause is when you have your ovaries removed, okay? And so obviously that, it is different to natural physiological menopause, because in natural physiological menopause, we've got perimenopause, we've got the winding down of the ovaries, but if you have surgery menopause, one day you go in there and your ovaries are there, and then the surgeon whips them out, and then suddenly you've gone from this level to literally zero. Because even after menopause, even after the ovaries have retired, in natural menopause, it's not zero, there's still something knocking around in the system. So it is a very different kettle of fish. It's a very sudden, unexpected, uncontrolled event, okay, that the ovaries are taken out. So number one, like you said, absolutely, that woman needs HRT the moment she wakes up from theatre. She needs HRT, and probably testosterone as well, right? Because the ovaries have been taken out. And to continue that at least until the age of natural menopause. So say she's had an oophorectomy, both ovaries, bilateral oophorectomy, both ovaries taken out, say when she's, I don't know, 35, then she should take HRT immediately, at least until the age of 51. At that point, it's her choice, but most likely she'll say continue. But anyway, so that's that point covered. So what happens if you've had a hysterectomy, you've had the uterus taken out, okay? So this is the situation where you're saying, theoretically, on paper, you don't have a uterus anymore, so you don't need progesterone, because progesterone, the argument goes, is only useful hormone for protecting the endometrium. If you haven't got an endometrium lining the uterus anymore because it's not there, then hey, you can just take estrogen, don't have to worry about progesterone. And in theory that is true, right? But in my experience, I agree with you. And certainly, I know that Professor Pryor would and Lara would agree with
Yeah,
you. Well, yeah, right. Progesterone, of course. This is this unsung hormone, right? And the thing I found, and I'm thinking of a particular patient who had a hysterectomy, was just taking estrogen by itself, but she was still, it was her mood, her sleep was still not. It was like, you know what, it's really bad. And I said, look, I know that you don't need progesterone for endometrial protection, but you know what? It's a great hormone, right? As Professor Pryor has pointed out in her studies, and it will help your sleep and help your mood and all that. So, you know, go and speak to your GP, the one that knows about these things. Put the argument. It's not going to do any harm, especially if it's micronized progesterone. What's the harm of it? Nothing. Okay. The only theoretical thing is the slight increased risk in breast cancer in taking HRT is thought to be down to more the progesterone component. But these figures come from synthetic types of progesterone, progestogen, right? So actually this natural one is good stuff, really. And it's difficult to think of any downsides to not taking it. And, you know, and lo and behold, she felt a heck of a lot better. So I think you're right in your instinct. You know, you got two hormones there. So even if you don't need, so again, it's downgrading the value of these hormones. It's like saying, oh, the menstrual cycle is only about reproduction. It's like saying progesterone is only about, you know, gestation, right? It's like, hold on a minute. What? This is crazy, because the receptors for these hormones all over the body, not just in the uterus, by the way, right? So, you know, is it in the brain as well, particularly? So I agree with you. And that's my advice to women in this situation. Again, do your homework, go and speak to a doctor who, you know, has an interest in this and explain. And, you know, again, it's this partnership, collaboration, because also if you're doing something, feeling confident that this is what you want, you understand what's going on, then it's much more likely to have a positive effect, right?
And then there's this testosterone kick everyone's on. Everyone's wanting testosterone. How do you feel about it for the average person going through perimenopause and menopause? Does everyone need it? Would everyone do well from it?
Not necessarily. Well, I call it testosterone frenzy. You're right. There is a lot of hype about testosterone, and you know, some celebrities have come out and said, "Oh, it's amazing, as prevents Alzheimer's," and I don't know what. Every single, you know, so that's exaggerated clearly. So the specific clinical indication for testosterone is in women, menopausal women who have got reduced libido. But this is in the woman who is already optimized on the systemic HRT we've described, the estrogen and progesterone, let's say she's got a uterus, right? And also vaginal estrogen, because by the way, there are many causes for reduced libido. One of them could be like physically, if it's uncomfortable, you know, like you've got vaginal dryness, it's not going to happen, is it? So, you know, it's got to be, and if you're not feeling good about yourself, you know, then, and you're, so there is lots of aspects to reduce libido. But say you've covered all the possibilities, systemic HRT, optimized dose, vaginal estrogen, you know, any psychological support that might be needed in terms of confidence, whatever. If you're still drawing a blank and the woman says, look, it's really bad and it's affecting my relationship, which is, you know, often what's reported, because the woman herself says like, well, you know, take it or leave it, I don't really mind. But, you know, if you're, you know, if like, then you feel bad on your partner. Anyway, so if you've tried everything but the woman is still saying, I'm really struggling, and the testosterone levels are low. This is a situation where doing a blood test is recommended, by the way, just to get an idea, baseline. Then in that case, then testosterone, it's worth trying. But there's a researcher, her name escapes me, which is slightly embarrassing, a moment of brain fog. Susan, but her name might come back to me by the end, from Australia. And she's
been
little
on the
skeptical.
Podcast. And her name is escaping me too.
What's her say name? Susan. Anyway, she has done a lot of work in this field in Australia on testosterone, and she is the results. And I've even seen her present.
Davis. I couldn't let it go. Susan Davis. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen her present at the British Menopause Society conference. Excellent speaker, and we had her on a we were doing a podcast at UCL anyway. And she's a little bit skeptical, if I can put it that way, about the testosterone, and it's equivocal. Does this really make a difference or not? And all this sort of thing. But again, it's also certainly like going back to how you think about it. If you've tried everything and you're really kind of desperate and you think testosterone might help, then maybe it will. So anyway, so that's the situation where for testosterone, but also to warn if for anybody who is competing in athletic events, sporting events, testosterone is on the banned list, whatever your age, and you will be banned. You will be banned for 4 years, and it's banned from all competitive sport, by the way. It's not just competing in your sport. So unfortunately for us as athletes, we can argue the toss, is this fair or right or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is I can't argue with the IOC. That's it, your WADA, should I say. You know what I mean? So that's a little warning as well, that, you have to also, for some individuals, I'm afraid if you are competing, it's a no-no. But for other women, again, it's specifically for that indication. And, if you want to, that's fine. I mean, anecdotally, personally, I don't, but I do take HRT, by the way. I do Hippocrates stuff, lifestyle, ballet, I've mentioned already. I do, so of course you shouldn't just do what I say, by the way, because that's making it too personal. But nevertheless, it's your decision. But that's how we view it in England. Those are the how we would, in what circumstance would we suggest testosterone? It is sort of an extra one. I mean, in the UK, we're actually quite lucky because now you can get a prepaid prescription for HRT, body identical, the top one. So transdermal estrogen gel, for example, or patch, and micronized progesterone, body identical, and vaginal estrogen for a bargain. Everyone needs to move to the UK. Bargain £19 a year for all of anything, but it doesn't cover testosterone because it is viewed as a kind of like an optional extra add-on, whereas the fundamental, the systemic HRT and the vaginal estrogen are seen as actually, very important for some women,
Okay. Also, I was interested in your book. You talked about large language models and AI, and there's a lot of there's a real shortage of research in this area, particularly in perimenopause. But I've also been learning lately about blockchain and some initiatives like Athena DAO to make all of scientific research, but more equitable and less gatekeeping. And that's a big whole topic. But where do you think for menopause this could help? This menopause and perimenopause, this understudied area?
Well, I mean, I think anything that's going to help push forward those boundaries, like you say, and AI specifically for female hormones, which I did a little bit of work with my husband in that. There is always potential because ultimately, there's only so many doctors, resources, and so if we could use a system that looks at all this information in a more effective, efficient way, brilliant. Of course, the downside to that is that, it is the reason that the only person that can really interpret a blood test is the doctor, because we've had many years of training and experience, and we understand the nuances, especially when it comes to hormones. And that's why I love it, by the way. Remember my detective work in Latin, piecing it together in the clinical context of the woman. So So I think there are definitely possibilities, and we know that AI has really helped advance some areas of medicine. I attend monthly, there's a meeting about AI in medicine, and it's fascinating. There have been really big breakthroughs in that sense, especially looking at images, detecting, looking at mammograms. Actually, it's better if it's taken away from the slightly subjective view, maybe. So there are some situations, I think, where AI can really be helpful, but there are others where there is always a limit. Ultimately, you can't get an AI to prescribe a medicine or whatever. You know what I mean? There are some limits. And also, AI, that's the other thing people get scared about it, artificial intelligence. It's not artificial. There's nothing artificial about it. It's augmented intelligence. It's when I was working with hormones, I downloaded my brain into the program, you see. But nevertheless, I think we have to be aware that, it does need that common sense check from, a doctor looking at it. But in terms of, you mentioned, language models and all this sort of thing, again, that can be really helpful, because my poor son had a job, which he hated, by the way, before he did his PhD, which is why I left it, actually. And he had to trawl through lots of papers and summarize. But actually now you can feed it in, it'll be read, and the system will give you these papers showed this, that. It's like, wow, so that's a really good use of it. And also, Chat GPT, I know there's lots of negatives about it, but now versions are improving, because when I first tried it, it was great. It gave me this information, and then it gave me a reference which was totally made up. So like, what the heck's that? So you do have to be discerning about it, but it can be helpful. It can be helpful to put in some information, and it puts it together for you. So again, it's always got to be it's augmented intelligence. We can definitely lever the power of it, but you have to look at it as well. A human has to look at it. But I think there is lots of potential, as you say, in this slightly uncharted water of perimenopause, menopause. But we will have a big challenge, which I found, because perimenopause, going back to, remember we said it's the uncertain time. The hormones are really uncertain. So trying to make a model of it is difficult, because it is uncertain. So now it's almost quantum mechanics and I don't know what. Anyway, quantum computing, there you go. That's what it is. Anyway, but which is, by the way,
entangling.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, that's way beyond me. I've been
No, that's too much. No, me too.
Too much.
Me too.
Anyway.
Okay, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you one last question. You're on the other side of are you on the other side of menopause?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I've been there, done that. So
any words of wisdom for people? Any encouraging words for people who think that it will never end?
Well, for me, the perimenopause was definitely the most challenging time because of the uncertainty. And although, of course, I'm, an endocrinologist, so for goodness sake, I knew about it. But until you're actually there and experiencing, you don't know. But it did occur to me when I was getting really anxious and thinking, oh my God, I can't do all this work. And then it was like, oh my goodness, if I didn't know what was happening, I literally would think I was losing my mind. All right. So my top tip is be informed, right? Prepare yourself. I can see you, so keep calm, right, in the background. So keep calm. Do your research before. It's never too early, right? It's never too early. If you're in your 30s and thinks, oh, that's way ahead, I would actually suggest you, just inform yourself, right? And so that when you come to perimenopause, you appreciate and understand, maybe what's going on, put the pieces together. So yeah, perimenopause was a challenging time, and hot flushes in the middle of meetings and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, and being sad and angry literally within a minute, it was like really weird. Anyway, so it is challenging, but you're right. Then it becomes a calmer journey. Menopause, when they've retired. And in terms of top tips, I like to think I've always been quite healthy in terms of lifestyle, but I did, a chance to review and revise, what I'm doing in terms of my exercise and nutrition. So I did all of that. And yeah, personally, I did make the decision to take HRT. But that, again, you could say, well, that was a cheat. She's a doctor. She did the course. Yeah, true. But even if I weren't a doctor, I'm kind of like the person who would have looked it up where I'm saying. And so then I could go and have a a good discussion, with my GP, and we agreed on HRT, and so I have navigated it along with lots of other women. Of course, I'm not saying I'm, the only woman that hasn't done this, but I guess I was at an advantage knowing about hormones. But, I'm not saying everyone has to retrain to be a doctor, but you can definitely, women are really inherently, inquisitive, and sort of hopefully getting more in tune with their hormones. So, you can go and do your own level of research, so you can feel confident making those informed decisions. Because like we said, it's not about what are the facts, but if you really understand them and you really positive about it, then that will make a difference, right? To how that works for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Hotflash Inc. was created and is hosted by Ann Marie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Ann Marie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hotflash Inc. Media.